So earlier this week we discussed the armor worn by the Grand Army of the Republic and their clone troopers, but I figured today we could talk about the equally iconic successor to this armor, the Stormtrooper armor worn by the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, the Stormtrooper armor, the iconic armor worn by the Empire Stormtroopers, one of the images that represent the Empire's power across the galaxy and the way that a large portion of the galaxy interacted with the Empire. Most of the galactic population, when they think of Imperial forces, are going to think of Stormtroopers, and here in the real world, we tend to do the same. So let's talk about this armor that's so iconic, discuss a little bit about how it works, and why there's maybe some misconceptions about it. Now, in every bit of documentation I could find, the Stormtrooper armor's manufacturer is simply labeled as the Imperial Department of Military Research. Now, I think that's a bit of a sort of mistake. I believe that the Imperial research organizations probably designed the armor and then handed them off to state factories to manufacture them, but I don't think the Department of Research was actually making the armor. But that being said, it was manufactured in a variety of factories all across the galaxy and distributed en masse. Now, the Empire did face challenges that weren't faced by the Kaminoans during the development of the armor for the clone troopers. Well, the Kaminoans had designed armor for a single body type, since their army were all clones. The army of the Empire and the Empire Stormtrooper Corps were recruited soldiers with a variety of different body types, heights, shapes, sizes. So the armor had to be manufactured in a bunch of different proportions to be worn by a bunch of different soldiers. This already provides a logistical challenge that just wasn't present beforehand, but is just an additional hurdle that the Empire had to face. That being said, they still made some substantial improvements on the clone armor that came before them. But let's talk about the basics first. Like the clone armor, the Stormtrooper armor consisted of a black body glove covered in white plastoid armored plating that provided protection against shock and environmental hazards. Now, once again, as I mentioned in my Clone Trooper armor video, this armor is not actually designed to protect against direct blaster fire. So, when we see Stormtroopers go down with a single hit, it's not because their armor sucks, it's because their armor wasn't designed for that. And even then, in a lot of these cases, blaster shots that would be fatal instead just simply incapacitate the soldier, which could then be revived, receive medical treatment, and be put back into combat later. So, the armor is not as useless as it might seem, and it's actually really effective against things like explosives and environmental hazards like acids and chemicals. Now, that being said, they did retain the sort of lack of a built-in rebreather system that was present on the Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor, meaning that if they were going into an environment like the vacuum of space, for example, they had to have a separate breathing apparatus to augment the relatively thin built-in breathing apparatus that was already in the helmet. For the user of the armor, the helmet provided a variety of bits of information, from a targeting reticle designed and tied directly to the E11 blaster, which allowed them to more accurately take shots at a target, information about other soldiers around them, allowing them to easily keep track of squad mates and other Imperial forces, and a network of sensors scattered around the helmet that allowed them to directly search areas that their eyes weren't actually pointing, giving the soldier inside a heads up if they're, say, being flanked. This also tied in with information systems that were built directly into the helmet that allowed the helmet's user to tap into local databases to find information about the environment around them or events going on that might be tied to local customs, for example, that maybe the soldier needs more information on. Moving down from the helmet, the next thing that's really worth mentioning is something that we don't see as much during the Clone Wars, although it was there on the Clone Trooper armor, and that's the utility belt, which plays a pretty big role in this set of armor. The utility belt holds everything from spare rations, spare ammunition, to a single thermal detonator mounted on the back of the belt, which, by the way, it's worth noting that this thermal detonator was designed in such a way that it would be difficult to use by anyone who got their hands on it that wasn't a trained Stormtrooper. Tactics that were fairly simple, like not labeling any of the controls on the thermal detonator, so unless you were trained on how to use that particular type of explosive, it was basically a complete mystery to you. It also included, famously, things like a grappling hook, which we see used by Luke Skywalker on the Death Star. Another interesting modification comes in the shin plate, so there's a shin extension on the left shin plate to cover the knee. This is designed to protect the soldier's knee when they're crouching to get a more stable firing position. this is actually a really interesting little tidbit built in that's just designed to make the Stormtroopers a little bit more accurate than clone troopers. Now, I know that sounds like a silly statement, but we're just going to move on from that. There is one more thing about this armor that I think is worth mentioning that is very much in line with the sort of mentality of the Empire. The helmet records all of the audio that goes through it. Shouldn't be surprising. It was, however, firmly forbidden for soldiers to have non-duty conversations while they were in the armor, and the armor would record all of the Stormtroopers' conversations to be played back for monitors later to observe and make sure that their Stormtroopers aren't violating the rule that says that they're not supposed to be having idle conversation and chit-chatting with other soldiers well in the armor, as it makes them less intimidating. Now, I would imagine that a lot of Stormtroopers got reprimanded for this because throughout the original trilogy and basically everything else that depicts Stormtroopers, they're chatty and honestly seem a little bit bored most of the time. So, this feature is a bit surprising, and maybe it was a less enforced rule, but still, it is a piece of equipment that was present in the armor. That being said, the Stormtrooper armor is most certainly an improvement over the Clone Trooper armor that came before it, regardless of how you feel about the replacement of the Clone Troopers with the Stormtroopers. But the armors are still fairly similar, and there are some pretty interesting similarities between the two armor sets. If you'd like to learn more about Clone Trooper armor, the armor worn by the Clone Army before the Stormtroopers existed, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you prefer the Clone Trooper armor or the Stormtrooper armor. Do you think the Stormtrooper armor with its advanced features is just a better set of armor, or do you prefer the aesthetics and designs of the Clone Trooper armor, which lacks some of the features, but is likely a little bit more comfortable for the specific wearers to wear, since they're all clones? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.